3, 2, 1.
Battle of the Decade.
Fight.
I must break you.
So for the Battle of the Decade in this episode, and our main topic, we'll be fighting it out on which decade had the best horror movie.
Round 1. Let's fight.
Choose your fighter.
Alright, for me, the 80s were filled with, it was all horror movies from the 1980s, both good and bad, and there were so many to choose from. So some of the good horror movies that had a big effect on me, and some honorable mentions, were the 1982's The Thing, 1980's Friday the 13th, 1987's Evil Dead 2. I also liked Evil Dead, but Evil Dead 2 was a whole new thing. 1987's Lost Boys and Hellraiser. 1984's Nightmare on Elm Street, and 1980's The Shining. And my first runner-up or honorable mention, this was almost the movie that I chose because it had such a big effect on me when I was a kid and scared the shit out of me, was 1981's American Werewolf in London. But my final choice for the best horror movie of the 1980s, and the one that scared me the most out of all of these movies when I first saw it, it came out in the year 1982, and my choice is Poltergeist.
So the 1990s was a great decade for movies of all genres, and for the horror genre, we see such great films as The Blair Witch Project, which gave birth to the found footage genre, scared the hell out of people who first saw it, and a lot of people thought it was a true story. We have Ringu and The Ring. So the Japanese version is amazing, and even though an inferior American remake drew a wider audience, people realized that Japanese horror was really terrifying and should be appreciated more by fans of the horror genre. We also have the movie Scream, which marks perhaps the most personal and reflective of all the slasher films, and represents a major turn towards big-budget horror as a place for burgeoning auteurs to hone their craft. Some more honorable mentions that I consider to have elements of horror, but are essentially thriller movies, include Silence of the Lambs, Seven, the original Funny Games, and Ravenous. But my choice for the best horror film of the 1990s is Jacob's Ladder, which was released in 1990.
Round 2. Let's fight.
Tail of the tape.
Some reasons why I chose Poltergeist was that it was directed by Tobe Hooper, who was famous for directing the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I believe was in 1974. It is one of my favorite horror movies of all times. And it was also written and produced by Steven Spielberg. Poltergeist made common household things you would find in any family's home terrifying, like thunderstorms, trees, a clown doll, and white noise or snow on a TV when the channel goes off the air. It had a great cast and a family that made everything believable in the movie. It was made on a budget of just $10.7 million and brought in almost $122 million at the box office. It was so good that they even tried to do a remake of it recently. Even though that had some good moments, it wasn't close to being as good as the original. Poltergeist still holds up today with some of the scariest scenes ever in horror to be put on the camera. It's the only scary movie from the 80s that still gives me the creeps looking back at it, and the impact that it had on me after seeing it.
Okay, and my choice for best horror movie of the decade was Jacob's Ladder, a 1990 American psychological horror film directed by Adrian Lyne, produced by Alan Marshall, written by Bruce Joel Rubin, and starring Tim Robbins, Elizabeth Pena, and Danny Aiello. The film's protagonist, Jacob, is a Vietnam War veteran whose experiences prior to and during the war result in strange, fragmentary visions and bizarre hallucinations that continue to haunt him. As his ordeal worsens, Jacob desperately attempts to figure out the truth. The reason why I chose this film is because it steered the horror genre into a direction that wasn't just related to spooky images or creepy stalker slasher flicks, I hate to use this term that's being thrown around today that is quote-unquote elevated horror because it demeans some classic horror movies of the past. But Jacob's Ladder stood out because it told us some of the most unsettling thoughts and imagery can come from the mind itself. I think this has paved the way for horror films that make you think, for example, Session 9, In the Mouth of Madness, Black Swan, The Babadook, Hereditary, and The Witch. Some other reasons why I chose Jacob's Ladder is because it delves into the mind, shows you how internal forces can make the story frightening. And this is much scarier than the thing that terrifies you that doesn't come from some external entity, but from within. These are horror films that people talk about and think about long after they are viewed. Some horror from the past was watched and then kind of scrubbed from the mind, but these films like Jacob's Ladder, you talk about them with your friend or the person you watched it with, and it has a greater artistic merit in terms of storytelling.
Round 3. Let's fight.
Counterattack.
All right, I kind of remember seeing Jacob's Ladder. Not sure what age when I saw it, but it wasn't in 1990 because I had rented it for the first time when I saw it. So it probably would have been a year or two afterwards. The key thing there is I kind of remember it. I remember it having a few scary images maybe, but I don't remember it being a scary movie. In fact, I don't even remember anything about the movie. Whereas Poltergeist, I can remember almost everything about it. You mentioned psychological horror sticks with you, but I don't remember much about Jacob's Ladder at all. And that sounds more like it would be a better movie to watch as an adult to understand it, and just sounds complicated. Poltergeist was made for a wide range of ages to understand, and psychologically speaking, scared me more. It made it hard for me to sleep at night and carried on with me into my teens and even into my adulthood. Jacob's Ladder cost over twice the budget as Poltergeist with about $25 million, but it only made $26 million at the box office. Doesn't mean it was a bad movie or a good movie, but it does mean that not many people went to see it and the word of mouth wasn't that great, unlike Poltergeist. And Jacob's Ladder, by all means, was a box office bomb.
And my thoughts and opinions of Poltergeist, as you mentioned, it was directed by Tobe Hooper. However, I heard that down the line he kind of lost a lot of artistic control over it, and there was even an article in the news that came out, or in the newspaper, that said that Steven Spielberg was secretly directing Poltergeist.
Yeah, it was a very Steven Spielberg-like movie.
Yeah, and I think that if they had given Tobe Hooper a lot more artistic freedom, I probably would appreciate it more as a horror movie, because I do love Texas Chainsaw Massacre as well, and I think that movie is terrifying than both of these films combined. I think Poltergeist is good for kids. It's scary for kids, but I think if I watched it now, I don't think it would scare me very much.
You'd be surprised. Try it.
I might, yeah, maybe I'll revisit it because you chose it. I think I'll revisit it for that reason alone, and I'll let you know maybe in a future episode what I thought.
Did you see the remake?
I did not, because I heard it was not very good. Yeah.
Round 4. Let's fight.
Final round.
And for the final round, again, why I chose Poltergeist from the 1980s, in a decade that gave us so many horror legend creatures and monsters like Jason Voorhees, Pinhead, and Freddy Krueger. As a kid, I didn't really relate to them and didn't have bad dreams about them after watching those movies. However, Poltergeist made a toy clown, which was a toy that I actually had, terrifying. And counting the gap between lightning and thunder and a tree banging against my window, which happened to me, was it had a lot of sleepless nights for me because of that. And the snow, off the air signal that was on TVs most of the time when channels went off the air was kind of unbearable to me after watching this movie. Like if I fell asleep and woke up and the channel had gone off the air and it was just that snow on the TV, I had to turn it off right away. The family and the characters or the actors in the movie were great. It made the movie feel believable, like it was it felt like it was a real family. Spielberg gave it his touch. Like you said, maybe he ended up directing it in the end, which I don't think is a bad thing because he's a legend. I think it would have been something different if it was a rated R movie. It might have been scarier watching it later on as an adult, but I would not have seen it when I did, which had a bigger effect on me at that time. And I think even now, whenever I hear a thunderstorm or see white noise on TV screens, it kind of gives me the chills. It scared me the most as a child in the 80s out of all the horror movies that came out during that time. I saw a lot of horror movies in the 80s, especially the late 80s, but Poltergeist just scared the shit out of me and stuck with me. And that's why I think Poltergeist is the best horror movie of the 1980s.
And some of my final thoughts on Jacob's Ladder. I think, as I mentioned before, psychological horror sticks with the viewer more. I think it has greater artistic merit in terms of storytelling. Not to take away credit from any of the other horror films, I think practical effects in some of them are very innovative and impressive, particularly with regards to things like American Werewolf in London. I mean, some of the practical effects in that are just, outstanding. The ending of Jacob's Ladder has that kind of twist that you don't really see coming, and the way it pulls that off in and of itself warrants its credibility as a classic horror movie. And it's a central pillar of the modern psychological horror film, Jacob's Ladder. It holds up today as an entertaining, disturbing film, and it has various meanings that can be discussed and argued between critics and viewers alike for the years to come. And also it brings kind of a dreamlike atmosphere to the horror genre, which I think we hadn't really seen in movies prior to this, aside from, the obvious Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. And those are the reasons why I chose Jacob's Ladder as the best horror movie of the 1990s.
So which horror movie do you think was the best from which decade? Was it Poltergeist from 1982 or was it Jacob's Ladder from 1990?
Remember, you can vote on which of these horror movies you thought was better in the poll in the above top right corner here on YouTube or any of social media at 10 Years Apart Pod or at our website 10yearsapart.com.
And finally, on this episode of 10 Years Apart, we're going back to look at a 1980s hairstyle fad that was known as the mullet. Can it make a comeback? Why did it fade away? It's time for Would That Fly Today. Did you like that clip? Well, if you did, remember to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to our channel for more videos just like this. You can also find the full version of the podcast this clip was from on our YouTube channel and more videos from 10 Years Apart. Comment below, tell us your ideas and stories from the 80s or 90s, and get more at 10yearsapart.com. Thanks again, and don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps us out.